Today, we're talking about King's Quest V. And as you might guess by the name, there are at least 4 other King's Quest titles that precede it. I know what you're wondering. Do I need to play the previous ones to enjoy this one? Nah. But generally, the series follows the royal family of the Kingdom of Daventry through some adventures. The star of the games is usually Sir Graham, a slightly dim-witted king who has to overcome some evil or find some relic. He's not the main protagonist in every game of the series, but he's become the face of the franchise. The first 4 King's Quest titled games all came out between 1984 and 1988 and were developed primarily for PCs. But wouldn't you know, the game considered to be first in the series had a completely different title, Wizard and the Princess from 1980. The link between this game and the King's Quest titles to come later is that they all take place in the land of Serenia. And it's worth noting that all the King's Quest games were developed by Sierra, a company very well known for their countless popular PC adventure games. King's Quest V, Absence Makes the Heart Go Yonder, its full title, released in 1990 on DOS and 2 years later on the NES, and I imagine at some point between 1990 and 1992, Konami said to Sierra, "Dang dudes, mind if we publish this for the NES? Now we'll have to tone down all the violence, nudity, language, references to alcohol, and references to religion, and generally neuter its personality through and through." And meanwhile, Nintendo was looking in on that conversation and nodding like, "Yeah, you dang right you will. You better tone it down." And Sierra was like, "Okay, yeah, sure, whatever, go ahead." And even though the series was developed with keyboard and mouse in mind, by 1992 the NES had proven PC ports could be successful on the system with various LucasArts and MacVenture games already selling well and earning praise. So would this one be any different? Well, hey, let's see what's up. Rarely do role-playing games let you be the king himself instead of a noble warrior or some scrappy hero. Here, you're Sir Graham, the King of Daventry. The manual drops a few pages of backstory for you if you want to catch up on the plot from the prequels, and then tells you why Graham's next quest is so important. See, an evil wizard named Mordock dropped by the castle one day and, stole it. Stole the whole castle. Fortunately, Graham was out for a walk when it happened, and upon his return, realizing his castle wasn't where he left it, he understandably becomes shocked. But good news, an owl named Cedric is nearby to give Graham the deets he needs, and off on our quest we go. You can move Graham around each screen with your D-pad, but to perform actions you'll need to access the top menu, which you can do by pressing either B or select. The menu allows you to look at objects using the icon of an eye, and it gives Graham the chance to make a comment about it, often snarky, but usually helpful. You can speak to a person using the mouth icon, and you can perform an action using the hand icon, which is often used to pick up items or interact with the environment. You also have an inventory menu where you can activate items you've accrued along the way, like equipping amulets or eating food. And the other important menu option is the letter M, which stands for memory and refers to the save menu, but I'll get to that in a second. So on each screen, you'll want to use the menu to look, talk, or interact with things and people you see. After you select one of those actions, you'll need to use the D-pad to move the cursor around the screen and select what you're interested in. I think it works about as well as it can on the NES. It takes a little getting used to, but within a few minutes, you'll get the hang of it. My fear in games like this is that the mechanics will make for a slow and tedious experience, despite how good the game itself is. But, again, despite the primitive controls of the NES, it emulates a mouse and keyboard well enough. Now, back to Cedric the Owl, who presents as Graham's companion, but is ultimately not a very good one. He won't fly into dangerous areas or towns, and if you try to talk to him, he offers very little in the way of hints or directions. He's pretty useless overall, and if I wanted to be conspiratorial, I would suppose he was in on the whole thing. His purpose is really just to facilitate conversation during certain moments and help the story along, but this is a bummer in a lot of ways, because the game, more than anything, could use a few hints from Cedric to help the player out when they become stuck. As you'd likely expect, this is a game of trial and error, and pretty much all errors will absolutely halt your progress. But the game itself won't always halt, meaning you'll have to find out the hard way if you've bricked yourself, usually by either not picking up an item you needed or because you used an item before you needed to. That's the biggest issue with this one, in games like this for that matter. I'm a little dim-witted and impatient myself, so I saved constantly. And speaking of saves, yes, you can save, and you should save, often. The save system here is actually pretty neat. You save in 2 ways. The first is a file save on the cart's battery, and the second is by using passwords. Your passwords are forever, so each time you wrap up a play session, go save and take down the password given to you. You can do this at almost any time in any place in the game, which is really nice and helpful. And the game even lets you re-enter the password you wrote down to check if it's correct before you shut off the system. Very thoughtful. As for the battery saves, labeled as files, you have a few slots available to you to serve as temporary saves. So when you turn the game off, these will disappear. But these save slots afford you the opportunity to take chances while you play the game. You can commit to that trial and error mindset while knowing you have the saving grace of reloading a recent save if things go off the rails. This is a really neat system for an NES game and the only game I've encountered thus far to save like this. If you've played adventure games like this before, the format of it will be familiar. If you boil it down, it's really all just a protracted riddle of inventory. Go to a place, perform a helpful deed, earn an item of sorts, and then take that item to someone who needs it in exchange for a different item, and so on, until you've made your way through the entire game. Many of the game's riddles often require a little outside-the-box thinking to identify their logical connections. One thing that I particularly liked about this game is its sense of humor. It's the only King's Quest game I've played, and I've not played many Sierra games in general, so I was delighted by the lighthearted and playful tone of it all. It's a medieval fantasy, but it's not wrought with burdensome lore or boring dialogue for the sake of fleshing it out. There is plenty of dialogue, but it's witty and charming, and worth paying attention to. On your journey, you'll brave barren deserts that drain your thirst, high snowy mountains that deplete your hunger, a dark forest that seems inescapable, and other dangerous perils galore. While not graphically mind-blowing, nor on the same level of its PC counterpart, the visuals get the job done. The music and sound effects are also well done for this port, staying recognizable to the original. So, will you solve the riddles of Serenia and retake your castle and family from the evil wizard, Mordok? Or will you become stuck and lost somewhere while a lazy, no-good owl perches above and mocks you with his frustrating silence? All said, King's Quest V ended up being more fun and more accessible than I originally thought it would be. Granted, I got stuck a bunch of times and had to consult a guide. It didn't detract from the fun I was having, nor did it diminish the game's charm. I mean, look at it. It's all dated in more than one way, but I think you'll find the NES control pad is up to the PC port challenge here and does a fine job. Plus, it provides a save system that encourages you to experiment with trial and error. If you're a hardened point-and-click adventure vet, this might not be enough for you. But if you're looking for something a little different than you normally play on your NES, this might be an experience you can settle into. If you plan to approach it casually, I recommend having a guide handy for some of the trickier areas of the game, like while navigating the desert or finding out which food to eat on the mountaintop. Well, that's going to do it for King's Quest V on the NES. As always, be skeptical of talking owls if your castle goes missing, and thanks for watching.